So wicked was the lost Appalachian bloodline that their existence was erased from history. In the shadow-drenched hollows of eastern Kentucky, deep where fog clings to ancient mountains like forgotten memories, a family so twisted by their own blood existed that the very earth seemed to reject them. The story of the Harlow clan is this, a lineage so deeply intertwined with itself that by the 1950s, their existence had become a shameful secret, buried beneath decades of silence. It was the year 1953. The Korean War had just ended, with America entering an era of prosperity and progress. But in the remote valleys of Pike County, Kentucky, time moved differently. Here, among the steep ridges and narrow creek beds, the modern world had not yet arrived. On a settlement that had been theirs for 5 generations lived the Harlow family. Isolated not just by geography but by choice and by consequence. A man of 62 years named Ezekiel Harlow was the family patriarch in 1953. His face bore the unmistakable marks of generational inbreeding. Too close together sat his eyes, separated by a bridge of nose that seemed to collapse inward. At an unnatural angle, his jaw protruded, making speech difficult and eating a laborious task. But Ezekiel was not the worst affected. He was merely the keeper of a terrible legacy. From weathered timber, 4 ramshackle cabins built the Harlow settlement, arranged in a loose circle around a central clearing where a stone well provided the only source of water. Here lived 17 people in 1953. All of them were Harlows. All of them were connected by blood so close that even the most uneducated observer could see the physical toll. An uneducated observer, Dr. Margaret Chun was not. From the University of Kentucky, she was a researcher. 34 years old, she was driven by both scientific curiosity and genuine compassion. When she first heard whispers about the Harlow people living up Cemetery Ridge, she had been conducting a rural health survey in Pike County in the spring of 1953. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel. You won't want to miss our exclusive investigations into America's darkest family secrets that mainstream media refuses to cover. Hit subscribe now to join our community of truth seekers. Only in hushed tones did local townsfolk in the small community of Elkhorn City speak of the Harlows, if they spoke of them at all. Perhaps twice a year the family came down from the mountain to trade moonshine and wild ginseng for flour, salt, and kerosene. To themselves they kept, and the townspeople preferred it that way. But Dr. Chun was persistent. To guide her up the treacherous mountain path to the Harlow settlement, she convinced Sheriff Thomas Blackwood on a cold morning in April 1953. The sheriff, a weathered man of 50 with deep-set eyes that had seen too much, initially refused. "Ma'am, some things are better left alone," Sheriff Blackwood told her. His Kentucky drawl was thick with warning. "Those people up there, they're not like us. For a long time, they haven't been." "That's exactly why I need to see them," Dr. Chun replied, her voice steady despite the unease creeping into her chest. "If they're suffering from medical conditions, they deserve help." Knowing the determination in her eyes, the sheriff sighed. "I'll take you, but don't say I didn't warn you." 3 hours the climb took. The April air was crisp, carrying the scent of blooming dogwood and damp earth. As they ascended, the forest seemed to close in around them. Silent fell the birds. Its breath, even the wind seemed to hold. When they finally emerged into the clearing, Dr. Chun froze. For the rest of her life, the sight before her would haunt her. On the porch of the nearest cabin sat a young woman, no more than 20. At impossible angles, her limbs were twisted. So severely was her spine curved that her torso seemed to fold in on itself. Though young, her face bore features that seemed ancient and wrong. Too large were her eyes. A mouth that couldn't fully close revealed teeth inside that grew in chaotic directions. A sound the woman made, something between a moan and a word, and from the cabin emerged Ezekiel Harlow. Slowly he moved, his gait uneven, and when he saw the strangers, into what might have been meant as a smile, his face contorted. "Visitors," Ezekiel said, the word distorted by his malformed jaw. "We don't get visitors." Professional composure, Dr. Chun forced herself to maintain. "Mr. Harlow, my name is Dr. Margaret Chun. I'm from the University of Kentucky. I'm here to conduct a health survey." For a long moment, Ezekiel studied her, his two closed eyes blinking slowly. "Health survey," he repeated as if tasting the words. "You want to know about our health?" "Yes, sir. I'd like to help if I can." Everything would change with what happened next. Ezekiel called out. From the 4 cabins emerged the rest of the Harlow clan. For many things, Dr. Chun's training had prepared her, but not for this. There was Martha, Ezekiel's wife, and also his first cousin, her face bearing the same collapsed features as her husband. Their children ranged in age from 5 to 30, each one displaying varying degrees of physical deformity. The youngest, a boy named Samuel, could not walk. Beneath him, his legs were twisted, and using arms that seemed too long for his small body, he dragged himself across the dirt. But it was Rachel who captured Dr. Chun's attention most fully. Rachel was 16 and she was Ezekiel's granddaughter, though the exact relationship was more complicated. Her mother had been Ezekiel's daughter by his sister, making Rachel the product of multiple generations of the closest possible blood relations. Among the most severe was Rachel's condition. A degree of mental clarity she possessed that the others lacked, which made her suffering all the more apparent. She could speak, though with difficulty, and in her eyes, Dr. Chun saw something that broke her heart. Awareness. "Help us," Rachel whispered when Dr. Chun approached. "Please help us." Incredible and confirmed, because what you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about hidden American history and the devastating price of isolation. Over the following weeks, Dr. Chun returned to the Harlow settlement repeatedly, each visit revealing new horrors. Everything she documented. The physical deformities, the genealogical charts that showed 5 generations of intermarriage between siblings, parents, and children, uncles, and nieces. Unmistakable and devastating was the pattern. A history that stretched back to 1847 was revealed by the investigation into the Harlow family, when the first Harlow settled in the Hollow. From Virginia, brothers Josiah and Caleb Harlow had come to Kentucky, bringing with them their wives, who were also their sisters. In the isolated mountain regions where communities were small and scattered and where suspicion of outsiders ran deep, this was not uncommon. But what began as circumstance hardened into practice. That keeping their bloodline pure would preserve their family strength, their land, and their way of life was what the Harlows believed. All contact with neighboring settlements they rejected. Viewing outsiders as threats to their unity, Dr. Chun discovered through county records that the Harlows had purchased their land in 1847 for $23. Stored in the Pike County Courthouse was the deed, yellowed and brittle. What the records didn't show was the deliberate isolation that followed. By 1875, the second generation of Harlows was entirely the product of brother-sister marriages. By 1900, the family tree had become so tangled that traditional genealogical charts became meaningless. Fathers were also uncles. Mothers were also aunts and children were so related to each other that calculating exact relationships became impossible. Cumulative were the physical effects. In her field notes, written by lantern light in a boarding house in Elkhorn City, Dr. Chun documented them all. May 12, 1953. Subject Rachel Harlow, age 16, displays severe maxillofacial deformities, including prognathism, dental malformations, and what appears to be a cleft palate that was never repaired. Due to hip dysplasia, she walks with significant difficulty. Above average intelligence she demonstrates, and she is acutely aware of her condition. She asked me today, "Why did God make us this way?" I had no answer for her. May 19, 1953. Subject Samuel Harlow, age 5, cannot walk or stand. Severe skeletal abnormalities would likely be revealed by X-rays. To simple sounds, his speech is limited. Despite her own significant limitations, his mother, Esther herself the product of uncle-niece relations, shows him tenderness. Profound is the family's capacity for love amid such suffering. June 3, 1953. Within the Harlow clan, I have identified at least 12 distinct genetic disorders, including what appears to be a form of dwarfism, multiple cases of severe intellectual disability, congenital heart defects audible even without a stethoscope, and blindness in 3 individuals. The youngest infant, born 2 weeks ago, lived only 6 days. Himself, Ezekiel buried her in the family cemetery behind the cabins. But only part of the tragedy were the physical deformities. The social and emotional devastation was also documented by Dr. Chun. In profound isolation lived the Harlows, cut off not just from the outside world, but from any possibility of a different future. Dr. Chun's primary informant became Rachel. She spoke when her father and grandfather were out hunting or working the small tobacco patch that provided their only cash crop. Through Rachel, Dr. Chun learned the full extent of the family's practices. "My mama was my daddy's sister," Rachel explained one afternoon. Her words were slow and carefully formed around her malformed palate. "And my daddy was also her daddy's brother's son. Granddaddy Ezekiel," he says, "it's how we keep the family strong. Keep outsiders from taking what's ours." "How do you feel about that?" Dr. Chun asked gently. For a long time, Rachel was quiet, staring at her twisted hands. "I feel like we're cursed. Like God's punishing us for something. But Granddaddy says God made us special, made us different for a purpose." Preservation was the purpose, Dr. Chun learned. That by keeping their bloodline closed, they maintained some essential purity, some connection to their ancestors that transcended physical reality was what the Harlows believed. Not as consequence, but as test, they saw their suffering. Their complete isolation reinforced this belief system. None of the children had ever attended school. Except for Dr. Chun, none of them had seen a doctor. Nothing of the outside world they knew except what they could glimpse from the mountain or learn from the rare trader who ventured up the hollow. Through religious fatalism, their understanding of their own condition was filtered. To his family every Sunday, Ezekiel preached, reading from a family Bible that dated to 1823. Simple was his theology. They were chosen to suffer, to be different, and through that suffering, they would be rewarded in heaven. Dr. Chun tried to explain genetics, to help them understand that their suffering had a biological cause, not a divine one. But on deaf ears, her words fell. A complete worldview that explained their existence had been created by the Harlows, and challenging that worldview threatened their only source of meaning. By July 1953, Dr. Chun had completed her initial survey. With documentation that shocked her colleagues, she returned to the University of Kentucky. The extent of the deformities was shown by photographs. The scope of the genetic damage was revealed by medical examinations. 5 generations of the closest possible inbreeding were illustrated by genealogical charts. To the Kentucky State Board of Health, she presented her findings. Immediate and troubling was the response. In Frankfort, Kentucky's capital, the meeting took place on August 14, 1953. Before a panel of 5 officials from the State Board of Health, plus representatives from the Department of Welfare and the Attorney General's office, Dr. Chun stood. With scientific detachment, she presented her findings, though her voice trembled as she described the youngest victims. "Gentlemen, what we're seeing in Pike County represents perhaps the most extreme case of genetic deterioration due to sustained inbreeding in American medical history. Immediate intervention, medical care, and social services are required by this family." Not what she expected was the response. Dr. Harold Morrison, the Board of Health's chief administrator, a man in his late 50s with steel-gray hair and cold eyes, leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Dr. Chun, your research is thorough, but have you considered the implications of making this public?" "Implications?" Dr. Chun felt her confusion rising. "Sir, these people are suffering. They need help. What they need," Morrison replied, his voice hardening, "is to be left alone. And what Kentucky needs is to avoid a scandal that would paint our entire state as backward and degenerate." Dr. Chun looked around the table. Not one face showed sympathy. Instead, she saw calculation, political maneuvering, and something darker. Shame. Next spoke the Attorney General's representative, James Caldwell. "Doctor, Kentucky is trying to modernize. We're attracting industry, building highways, showing the nation that we're not just hillbillies and moonshiners. A story like this about a family, so..." He paused, searching for words. "Deteriorated. Would set us back decades. But they're human beings," Dr. Chun protested. "They deserve care. They deserve privacy," Morrison countered. "And so does the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Here's what's going to happen. You will seal your research. It will not be published. It will not be discussed. The Harlow family will be left in peace, and this matter will be closed. And if I refuse?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Then you will find that your research funding has been terminated. Your position at the university has been eliminated and your medical license in Kentucky has been revoked. Do I make myself clear?" In shock, Dr. Chun left the meeting, but she was not defeated. If the state wouldn't help, she would find someone who would. She contacted the Federal Children's Bureau, a division of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. In September 1953, federal investigator Robert Hayes arrived in Pike County to conduct his own assessment. A veteran investigator was Hayes, 47 years old, from Ohio. Throughout Appalachia, he had seen poverty and neglect, but nothing prepared him for the Harlows. When Dr. Chun led him up Cemetery Ridge, Hayes maintained professional composure until they reached the settlement. Then, confronted with the reality of 5 generations of inbreeding, even his hardened demeanor cracked. "Dear God," he whispered, watching young Samuel drag himself across the dirt. "How has this been allowed to continue?" Everything, Dr. Chun and Hayes documented together. They took additional photographs, conducted more detailed medical examinations, and most importantly, they interviewed every family member who could communicate. "At this strategic moment, I want you to do something. Think about Rachel, 16 years old, trapped in a body destroyed by generations of her family's choices, aware enough to understand her suffering, but powerless to escape it. If her story touches your heart, if you feel the weight of her tragedy, leave a comment right now saying, 'Rachel deserved better.' Let her story be heard. Let her pain be acknowledged. Comment now, 'Rachel deserved better.'" It was during these interviews that the full horror emerged. The family wasn't just practicing inbreeding through ignorance or isolation. There was a structure to it, a system enforced by Ezekiel and the generation before him. Young women in the family had no choice in their partners. To male relatives they were assigned based on what Ezekiel called family planning. The goal was to maintain the bloodline while producing enough children to work the land and care for the severely disabled family members. To Dr. Chun, in a moment of desperate honesty, Rachel revealed this. Next year when I turn 17, Granddaddy says, I'll marry my Uncle Thomas. He's 42. I don't want to, but I don't have a choice. He says, it's my duty to the family." Ezekiel's younger brother was Thomas, a man whose mental faculties were severely limited, but whose physical strength made him valuable for farm work. With rage and determination, the thought of Rachel being forced into this union filled Dr. Chun. Immediately, Hayes contacted federal authorities. A case was built, not just on medical grounds, but on civil rights violations. The plan was to remove the children from the settlement, provide them with medical care, and prosecute Ezekiel and the other family elders for child endangerment. But before any action could be taken, everything fell apart. In November 1953, Hayes was abruptly recalled to Washington. Without explanation, his investigation was terminated. From 2 men who identified themselves as working for the Kentucky State Police, Dr. Chun received a visit. "Ma'am, you need to stop your activities regarding the Harlow family." One of them said, "This comes from the highest levels. Leave those people alone." "Who sent you?" Dr. Chun demanded. "Who has the authority to suppress a federal investigation?" They didn't answer. They simply left. But clear was their message. Through back channels, Dr. Chun later learned that powerful political forces had intervened. Kuki's governor, a man deeply concerned about the state's image, had personally contacted members of Congress. Pressure was applied. Killed was the investigation. Complex were the reasons, but ultimately came down to shame and political calculation. Its image as a backward state, Kentucky was trying to shed. Everything the state wanted to hide was represented by the Harlow case. Poverty, isolation, ignorance, and the kind of degeneration that fed into every negative stereotype about Appalachia. Better to bury the story than to expose it. Dr. Chun refused to give up. If she couldn't help through official channels, she would try directly. In December 1953, she returned to the Harlow settlement one last time. Covered in fresh snow was the mountain, making the climb treacherous. When she arrived, she found the settlement in chaos. 3 days earlier, young Samuel had died. His twisted body had finally given out, his heart unable to sustain the demands placed on it by his deformed skeletal system. In mourning was the family, such as they understood it. On his porch sat Ezekiel, staring at nothing. Inside the cabin, Martha wailed, a sound like an injured animal. But it was Rachel that Dr. Chun sought out. In the small cemetery behind the cabin, she found the girl standing before a fresh mound of earth marked by a simple wooden cross. "Rachel," Dr. Chun said softly. "I'm so sorry." Rachel didn't turn. "He's better off dead. We all would be." "Don't say that. There's still hope. I can help you and get you out of here." Now Rachel turned, and in the girl's eyes, Dr. Chun saw something that hadn't been there before. Resignation. "Where would I go? Who would want me looking like this? At least here. I'm with family. At least here I belong somewhere. Rachel, next year when you turn 17, I know. Uncle Thomas. I've known my whole life. It's my duty." The words were flat, lifeless. Dr. Chun tried to explain that she had choices, that the outside world wasn't as frightening as she'd been taught, that medical science could help her. But Rachel simply shook her head. "You don't understand. You can't understand. This is all I know. This is all I'll ever know." Knowing she had failed, Dr. Chun left the mountain that day. She had failed Rachel, failed Samuel, failed all of them. In January 1954, she made one final attempt. To a medical journal, she submitted her research, hoping that publication would force action. It was rejected by the journal, citing sensitivity concerns and insufficient public interest. In the university archives, her research was sealed and filed away, marked restricted access. But the story of the Harlows didn't end there. Over the following decades, the family continued their isolated existence. By 1970, the settlement had shrunk to 8 people. By 1985, only 3 remained. From afar, Dr. Chun tracked them, gathering what information she could through occasional contacts in Pike County. Each generation became smaller, weaker, more damaged than the last. Rachel never escaped. She did marry her Uncle Thomas in 1954. 3 children she bore him, all of whom died before reaching age 10. In 1971, she herself died at the age of 34. Her body simply gave out, worn down by genetic damage and hard living. Until 1966, Ezekiel lived, maintaining his beliefs until the end. "We kept the blood pure. That's what matters," were his last recorded words spoken to a visiting minister. The final Harlow died in 1989. Jacob was his name, and he was the last of a bloodline that had destroyed itself through willful isolation and ignorance. In the last remaining cabin, alone, he was found dead. By the accumulated genetic damage of 6 generations, his body was twisted. After Jacob's death, something remarkable happened. Deliberately erased was the Harlow story. In 1991, the Pike County Courthouse experienced a convenient fire that destroyed many old records, including the Harlow land deed and birth certificates. The university archives where Dr. Chun's research was stored were reorganized and her files were lost. By the forest, the settlement itself was reclaimed. The cabins collapsed. Overgrown was the cemetery. Within a decade, no physical evidence remained that the Harlows had ever existed. This erasure wasn't accidental. It was systematic. Kentucky officials, still sensitive about the state's image, ensured that this embarrassing chapter was removed from the historical record. In 1997, Dr. Chun died at the age of 78. Before her death, she entrusted her personal copies of the Harlow research to a colleague with instructions that they be preserved. That research, hidden for decades, has only recently come to light. Straightforward is the scientific explanation for what happened to the Harlows. The expression of recessive genetic disorders is caused by inbreeding. Multiple harmful recessive genes are carried by every human, but these rarely cause problems because they're masked by healthy dominant genes from unrelated partners. When close relatives reproduce, the chance of matching recessive genes increases dramatically. Significant risks are carried by first-generation inbreeding. Catastrophic is second-generation inbreeding. By the fifth and sixth generations, genetic damage becomes so severe that survival itself becomes difficult. Classic inbreeding depression was displayed by the Harlows: reduced fertility, increased infant mortality, physical deformities, reduced intelligence, and shortened lifespan. Each generation was weaker than the last until the bloodline simply could not sustain itself. But the scientific explanation, while accurate, doesn't capture the full tragedy. Of ideology, isolation, and ignorance, the Harlows were victims. They believed they were preserving something valuable when in fact they were destroying themselves. Also victims of a society that chose shame over compassion, they were. Dr. Chun tried to help, but she was stopped by people who cared more about image than about human suffering. The Harlows could have been saved, but they weren't worth the embarrassment. Though few people know it's there, the cemetery on Cemetery Ridge still exists. Beneath the kudzu and wild blackberry bushes lie the remains of 6 generations of Harlows, a family that bred itself into extinction. A warning about the dangers of isolation is their story, both genetic and social. That purity, whether of bloodline or ideology, is often a path to destruction is a reminder. And it's a testament to the human capacity for suffering and endurance. Rachel Harlow deserved better. Samuel deserved better. They all deserved better than the hand fate and family dealt them. From history, their existence was erased, but their story remains preserved in the hidden research of a doctor who cared when no one else would. So wicked was the lost Appalachian bloodline that their existence was erased from history. Now you know the truth. Now you understand what happens when bloodlines close, when isolation hardens into ideology, when shame silences compassion. If you've watched until this moment, if this story has moved you or shocked you or made you think differently about hidden American history, then I need you to do something. First, make sure you're subscribed to this channel because stories like this, stories that were meant to stay buried, need to be told. Second, leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end," so I can know who truly appreciates these deep investigations into forgotten tragedies. Third, hit that like button if you believe these stories matter. And finally, share this video with someone who needs to understand that real history is often darker and more complex than we're taught. The Harlows existed. They suffered. They were erased. But their story will not be forgotten again.